Excited to have another conversation today. Welcome back, Mom. How you
Thank you very
doing?
much. I'm good. I'm excited to talk with you about what's going on.
Yeah, it's been, well, I mean, I feel like the last 2 years, there's always something crazy happening in the real estate world. But
Hmm.
recently, it's been constant with news about interest rates and inflation. And are we headed into a housing crash or a recession? Or, I mean, you can't escape it. It's every news channel, it's every article, it's all over the place.
Yeah, well, that's because bad news sells. So if it,
Yeah.
if it bleeds, it leads, they used to say in the news. So they want to hear doom and gloom because that's what everybody watches.
Yeah. Well, and so I guess if there was any focus of today, I think some of it is to dispel the doom and gloom, or really just to talk about what we're actually seeing right now. So I think what the number one fear that I hear from buyers right now, or people who are hesitant to get involved in the marketplace, and I do think that that's how I would describe the marketation or the marketplace right now, is people are hesitant to get involved.
I agree.
So I think the reason that I'm hearing twofold. Number one, they're afraid of interest rates, or really the
Hmm.
volatility that they've seen in interest rates over the last now 9 months, call it. And number two, all they hear about is inflation, 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 and somehow that's driving this fear that investing money in real estate right now is a poor decision. And I don't know exactly where that's coming from, but the only time of reference I can think where this happened again in recent history was sort of around 2008 in a little bit of a different way. So I thought maybe it'd
Hmm.
be interesting just for you to talk about similarities, differences. I mean, what are you seeing now that feels different or the same?
Well, sure. Well, back at that time, if you remember, housing was way up. We had way more starts. I think the number is 3.8 million starts in 2016, and we're down to like 1.4 million right now. So we had an
Wow.
abundance of housing.
Yeah.
Not only that, but if you had a breath in your body and you could maybe, you know, pass a lie detector test and say you had a job, you could get a house. We had stated income, so they didn't even check. We had no income qualifying. They were called Sissa and Nina. We had 0% down. I mean, really, they were begging people to buy houses. And so we had all these people who might not have been the best buyers. They really maybe shouldn't have been in the market. They had no skin in the game and they had no risk. And so you have this overabundance of supply, and everybody and their brother can buy a house. And now what? So
Right.
after, at that point, we went into a big spiral because people thought that was not a sustainable business model lending wise. So that crashed. There was too many houses, so prices crashed.
Hmm.
And when that happens, what does the Fed do? Well, the Fed tries to jump in and change things. The Fed wants to make the market shift, and they think that they're the ones that can do that. And that's what they're trying to do again right now.
Right. And they, by their own admission, are behind on it, right? I mean, they did
Sure.
not foresee inflation being as big an issue as it is when it became an issue. And so they chose to ignore it, which is traditional financial advice, until they didn't, right? Until
Right.
now we have to, it's like unprecedented. We have to act. It's interesting you mentioned that because I do think we're starting to see similar loan options come into play, or things that I've seen before when things are a little bit harder for buyers. So, for example, I'm starting to hear people ask again about how do I buy down points, right? Or how do I buy down my interest rate? Or I'm starting to hear more and more people agreeing to like ARM agreements or ARM loan agreements, or even I've seen balloon payments making their way back. I
Right.
think all of that is okay, and we actually I had a good discussion with the financial advisor about how it's savvy investors use long-term balloon investment strategies and they refinance all the time. I think the problem comes in when, like you're saying, when it's accessible to everybody and your common buyer buys in, not really recognizing what they've agreed to, and
Hmm.
now all of a sudden the payments catch up and they do get
Hmm.
this balloon interest rate. I mean, you're underwater overnight, right? I mean, nobody can
Yeah.
keep up with that. And so
Yeah.
that's
You have
where
to be a
I'm
savvy
curious where
buyer.
this is headed, or if you've seen similar things in your marketplace.
Yeah, you have to be a savvy consumer. It's kind of like people who choose to pay their taxes themselves or they have it escrowed in their payment.
Mm-hmm.
If you're really a good money person and you have the head for money and you can do that, it's fine. An arm or a balloon is fine too. There's a place for that in the marketplace, but not for everyone. A lot of
Right.
people really need that fixed, steady Eddie. I know my payment forever payment.
Well, and it's easier to plan that way too. I mean, if you're constantly in this state of moving money around, don't get me wrong, it's a great way to build wealth and you can invest from properties and borrow against or refinance against properties to buy more. And it's an awesome strategy. But if you're just taking on a loan that one day is going to explode on you with the interest rate, that's not really the most predictable way to purchase a property. And if you're doing so, you better be doing so with the mindset of refinancing or selling within a very short time frame, right? Because you got
Yeah,
to clear the books.
they tell you if you're going to look at arms, like right now, 10-1 arm is very big
Right.
because most people do move at about 9 years. So that's an
In
average.
a traditional market in 9, 10 years, you should make enough. Maybe you're not going to make great money on the sale and just straight appreciation, but you should make
Right,
enough to cover your fees and get out of the house, right? Like, I mean,
right.
so that would be the hope.
But if you
Um,
don't, then you better be ready for that adjustment. And we don't know. We don't know where it's going to be in 2 years, never mind 9 years.
right.
So you have to have the stomach for that kind of market.
Well, adjustment, when I hear that word, my mind goes to recession now. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe just because we've heard it so many times. I think I would argue that we're in it. We're in a
Hmm.
recession already in the
Hmm.
beginning stages of. I think some would argue it's coming, but there are very few that would say it's not happening. So
Right.
when we think about that in relation to housing, and maybe specifically the difference now between what we've seen before in recession times, I mean, are you seeing or feeling it in your market yet, or is it still kind of a trailing effect?
Am I seeing the recession factor, you mean?
Yeah, are you feeling it with buyers, sellers? Are you feeling it in the marketplace?
Yeah, I think it's more chatter than actuality at the moment because people remember 2006, 7, 8 wasn't that long ago. I remember 89, 90, 91, same thing. And so what
Right,
happens, we see in housing in general during a recession is housing stays strong during a recession because when we have a recession, usually the market shifts to the buyer's favor at some point.
right.
And what happens is after the recession, if you can hang on long enough after the recession, it's usually a big bump for everybody. So
Yeah, I
keep
think almost every time in history when we've seen a major recession or even a depression, right after house prices appreciate significantly. Now, the
right,
exception for that was 2008, but even in that, when it immediately decreased, it was just because we had so many fraudulent loans and subpar loan rates out there. So that was
you
completely
did.
different. But in times where the market is operating as it should be, housing tends to respond strongly after a
It does.
recession. So
It does.
those who are in a position to buy right now are actually sitting pretty.
Yeah, and you build wealth through home equity. That's everyone knows that, I think. And
Hmm.
so you need to look at this as an investment in your future. It's obviously a place to live and there's value in that particular thing too.
Right.
But it's a long-term money management or money growth system. I saw an interesting thing on Kiplinger's, which was talking about where the top 1%, like how much you have to be in the top 1% in the country, and that's $10.8 million. So, there's a goal for us to strive for.
Yeah.
But the top 2% is 2.5 million in assets. Top 5% is 1 million in assets.
Wow.
I'll jump to the bottom. The top 50% of the entire country is $500,000 in assets. Now,
Wow.
don't get me
That's
wrong, that's a
crazy.
lot of money, but it's
Yeah.
not that much money.
Well, no, not I mean not when you think about particularly now the scale of wealth that people have built and how they get to it and how quickly they get to $1 million in some cases. And so that's unbelievable to think about. I think really and the bigger part of this too is that the benefit of investing in real estate, whether you're doing it now, whether you did it last year, whether your interest rate is 3 or was it 6, is that long term it's a
Hmm.
vehicle for wealth. You can pass it
Right.
down as an asset, you can borrow against it, it's hopefully appreciating. And I think even in the best case, like I know that you're looking for rental properties and I've been looking for them as well, you have
Hmm.
something that's even income producing while it's appreciating in the background, right?
Yeah.
And that's like the ideal situation. And there are tax benefits to that as well. But I think in general, what you see is people who figure out along the path to getting to the top 50, 25, 5%, most of them at some point have real estate assets there to carry
Absolutely.
their wealth.
Absolutely. And we have a lot of talk now about should I rent? And,
Right.
understandably, not everybody is in the position to buy. We all understand that. But if you're in the position to buy, think about it for a second. If you buy a house and you can rent, though, like at the same time, and maybe the house
Right.
payment's 2,700 fixed for 30 years, and your rent's maybe 2,500. Well, the win in that moment is rent in your head.
Right.
But in very short order, rentals tend to go up an average of 6 to 9% annually. So now
And
you
this
have,
last year was something like 20 to 30% in
yeah, well, it
certain
was
areas.
crazy town. So now you have your steady Eddie interest rate and you have your rents going higher, higher, higher. So the analogy I love is if I have money in my right pocket and I take it out and put it in my left pocket, is it still my money? And the answer is
Right.
of course, right? So when when you're making a payment, you're paying on your principal, which is your money. You're
Yeah.
paying yourself. But when you're paying rent, you're paying somebody else's money. You're giving somebody else money. So
Right.
you might as well
Exactly.
burn it.
Well, and I think people sometimes don't understand that there's this thought process out there that when you're paying rent, your landlord must be making a huge profit and taking it to the bank. And but when they look at it, I mean, most landlords are lucky to get into the green by a couple $100, right, a
Right?
month. And if they're doing that, that's really just covering, God forbid, something breaks throughout the year, you know.
Yeah.
So when you look at it, really what you're beholden to is, at least here in Chicago, what we've seen is when property taxes go up or
Mm-hmm.
when inflation causes the cost of services to go up, like your utilities, there's nothing else that can happen except for your rent to go up, right?
Right.
So the avoidance to that is having a mortgage cost that is at least steady. Yeah, you can't change the property taxes portion of it, but you're no longer baking in a buffer on top of that as a tenant and paying for it for somebody else. And that's the key
Right.
difference, right? At least
Yep.
I'm locked into paying for my equity long term versus these tenants now, they just get a bill that's 20% higher than last year and they got to deal with it.
Yeah, and the landlord's banking on the return being at the end when they sell it.
Right, right.
They're not usually, to your point, they're not usually going on vacation with the money they're making on their rentals. They're just hoping not to lose their
Yeah,
pants.
you're paying down their mortgage, right? The whole
Right.
point is you're carrying their building for them, which is like, as a tenant, you are paying a mortgage, you're just not paying your own, you know?
You're
So,
buying a house for that landlord.
right, exactly. And the longer you stay there, the better for them. But
Right.
they do have to adjust because they can't lose money on you. I mean, that's
Right.
just the reality of it. So, when we have a rough property tax season or when inflation is as high as it is, those costs roll downhill. And usually, the rental market sees it first, and then we
Hmm.
start to see it move into the housing market. I do think we are starting to see that. Housing, rather than going like this, like it
Hmm.
was, is in most areas flat, and in some, as we've seen in articles, down relatively steep, 10, 15%, right?
Hmm.
I think that's the correction that we've all been waiting for.
Yeah, I think most economists are saying we're going to kind of do this for a while. They were saying we're undervalued before, so maybe we've
Right,
kind of finally got to the right place. It's hard to know. And the interest rate shifts is scaring a lot of people because we got so spoiled having
right,
even in the twos, threes, fours. If you look at since we've been tracking interest rates, the average interest rate was if you had under 10%, you were doing all right.
right.
The average is 7%. So we're not even at the average since they've been tracking interest rates. We're just spoiled. So
Yeah.
we all need to screw our heads back
Well,
on.
and time is helping with that, I'm noticing. So I think the people who are really struggling with interest rates are the people who were looking to buy when interest rates were at 2.75 or 3
Sure.
and they didn't, right? For one
Yep.
reason or another, they couldn't find a place or they didn't pull the trigger or maybe they just got a little snobby that things would last forever, but it didn't work out. And now they have this crazy high interest rate. And that's painful, truly and sincerely it is. So I think, but that's different than I have clients who have called me this week. They just started, like just picked up their search out of nowhere, decided they want to buy. It's not as painful for them. This interest rate, based on everything they can see, based on historical averages, pretty competitive. When they talk to their
Right.
parents, it's probably better than what they bought by a significant margin. So
Right.
it's all about perspective and when you're entering this process. But right now we have so many people that didn't win the last time they tried to buy when rates are really good. And the reality is, if you're keeping the same monthly budget, yeah, you're going to afford a lot less house right now. I mean,
Right.
to a significant margin.
Sure. And all expenses are up right now too.
Right,
Gas and goods and services, everything's up. So it's
right.
kind of it's a real challenge for most people to make that budget make sense to them if they were looking at it a year ago or 6 months
Hmm.
ago even.
Yeah.
So, it's a learning curve, in other
I think
words.
a lender I was talking with this morning, he said it used to be that he had clients ask all the time for first-time homebuyer programs or down payment assistance programs, and it wasn't uncommon. But he said now it's darn near 100% of the calls. Everybody's like, what is out there to help me save money, get more money, get money to help do this, you know? So I think the interest is there to participate in this housing market. Right now, a lot of people are just unsure how best to do it. They're not sure where to take their information on where the rates are headed, on what inflation actually means, and where the economy is. Are we in a recession? Is it coming? Or is there worse days ahead? I think all that is just noise. It's very confusing for somebody who's trying to make a decision of, should I buy a house right now?
Well, historically, when we have a recession, interest rates trail.
Yeah,
So the economists are saying, the Fed's going to correct, 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 and then we know they're going to overcorrect, which is what
right.
they always do. And interest rates will probably drop over time, probably in the first quarter of next year, to accommodate where the market has gone. So that might be a buying opportunity for people that, were on the fence at that point. But
Yeah,
still, we're still sub six, which is
right.
great.
Right. It's still, it's unbelievable how low it is, historically speaking.
Yep.
Definitely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I have a lot of buyers right now that are looking for their move up property and so forth, but really they're starting to really understand the economics of being a landlord. And so
Yeah.
I'm seeing an uptick in my market anyway of people looking for investment properties, some two or three at a time. And
Right.
prices are really not as important to them because they feel like the shift is going to be upward over time. And they're going to charge enough rent to make that payment anyway, so they really don't care what the house costs.
Yeah, the reality is, I mean, that's all you need covered, right? If you can run the numbers and make sure that you can find a consistent tenant, short or long term, that will at
Right.
least cover your cost of owning the property, yeah, that is where people are sinking a lot of money, especially now that you're not seeing the stock market going through incredible rocket returns like it was a year ago. People need another vessel to put their money in, and we are still seeing the investors go crazy like that. I mean, the short-term rental investors are going nuts right now, taking advantage of the market because travel is still hot. So I think depending on what marketplace you're in, the strategy hasn't changed. What I am noticing though, and I'm sure you've seen the same, is my investors who are looking, for example, if they're flipping, they just
Mm-hmm.
have to run with different margins. You're not going to
Mm-hmm.
make the same profit that you were going to make a year ago.
Yeah.
Construction costs are too high. The timeline's going to take longer. The property's going to cost more.
Mm-hmm.
Everything's up. Everything's up. So as long as you're taking that into account, I think you can still make really sound investment decisions,
Right.
regardless of what strategy it is. But you have to just know it's not going to be as great as it was 12 months ago.
Yeah, we're not seeing quite as many flips anymore because, to your point, it takes longer, it costs more all the way around from goods and services to the property to the interest. So I'm seeing
Right.
more buy and hold situations than flipping right now.
Yeah.
A lot of the contractors have kind of backed off a little bit. But it'll be interesting to see how that turns around. It's a scary time for a lot of people, and they don't know what to do with their money. But leaving it in your bank, have you checked your interest rates at your bank account lately?
Right.
They're
Yeah.
blasting emails. Woo, we're giving you 1.9%. It's like,
Yeah.
really?
It's such a win. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
So where do you put your money to get a good return? Well, real estate's always been a great investment.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think especially now when we see so much is in jeopardy just with long-term savings and retirement savings and
Hmm.
pensions, and so much just
Hmm.
seems to be on the line, right? With the one form of consistent income that has been here and continues to be here is just having a stable real estate investment, particularly if you can have rental income from it to
Hmm.
cover your costs.
Yep.
And that's true of any market, right? It's universal. So.
Yep.
So what do you think now that we know, okay, we talked a little bit about inflation, we've seen where we think interest rates are headed to a certain degree. What are you predicting for the end of the year in your marketplace from now through the end of December? Do you think that you're going to have a relatively slow market? Do you think activity will pick back up? Is it highly variable? Like we have elections coming up. I mean, add that into the mix. So,
That's always a
you
thing.
know, what do you foresee happening in the next 3 months?
Well, we felt like this summer was the first year since pre-COVID that we had our normal seasonality. And as you know, seasonality just means certain things happen at different seasons in the year pretty regularly. You can bet on them.
Yeah.
So we know we've all heard of spring market. We all know what that is. Well, we usually have seasonality in the fall too. We have a bump in the fall.
Hmm.
So we're starting to feel that more buyers are calling. I'm seeing more inventory come up. Not a lot, but more. And I think we have a mix. We have some sellers that worried that they missed it. I missed
Yeah.
that really big rabid moment. And they did. They did miss it. But it's still really good. So I
Right.
think we have those sellers dipping their toe in the water. And then we have buyers that are afraid of what's coming next because they just don't know. So they're jumping in droves.
Yeah,
So I think we're going to have a strong fourth quarter and first quarter of next year. How about you?
I agree. Yeah, I think we're seeing. It's funny. It's similarly aligned, but in a slightly different way. I think I have a lot of buyers who are getting active in their minds very early. They're like, I'm buying next spring. I just want to get started now because I know it's crazy. I want to start looking. And then, sure enough, they make an offer in like 2 weeks, and now they're all of a sudden closing before the end of the year, right?
Right.
So, and that happens. But I think that I am seeing that a lot more now. That once people start getting active, they're starting to realize how many opportunities there really are
Oh, yeah.
if you're looking in certain neighborhoods. And then on the flip side, I couldn't agree more on the seller side. Every seller I have, especially those preparing to go on market that aren't live right now, they're still telling the stories of, well, my friends in this community went under contract in 12 hours with this many offers. And I'm like, look,
Hmm.
with your neighborhood, our market time around the city now is back up at like 60 to 80 days, right? So this is not a list it and be done in a weekend type situation anymore. It was less than a year ago, you're right, but the time sailed and the time to list at the top of the market is gone.
Hmm.
So, we have to price A in accordance with where we're headed, which is winter, and B, you have to be expecting longer market times. So I think
Yeah,
there's still success to be had. You just need to go and do it with the right mindset, the right expectations.
absolutely. I had a listing go live today, and she called me and said, I have people wanting to make appointments for Wednesday. Should I decline? I said, why? She goes, well, we will probably have the house sold by then. I said, do not count your chickens. I have
No, yeah,
nothing. I have nothing but appointments right now.
yeah.
So it's funny. Sellers do get it in their head that like 20 offers in 2 days is normal behavior. It is not.
Well, and more so, I think I'm having to train bad behavior for sellers because they've gotten in the mindset that it's gonna sell. I don't have to do anything; it's gonna sell. So,
Uh,
I mean, I've had one listing where they declined every request for like a week, and they're like, we got this going on, we got work, we got visitors, we're cleaning. And finally, you have to say eventually, listen, if I'm gonna sell your house, I have to show it. I have to let people inside. They're not just gonna get an offer because you listed it and somebody saw it online. That we're through those days.
yeah.
So I do think sellers, the pain of selling is back a little bit. You're probably going to
Yep.
have more showings. It's going to take longer. There's probably going to be a lot more cleaning than you remember. So
Oh, yeah.
this is no longer we took iPhone photos and it sold in 2 seconds for 50,000 above list.
No,
That's
we're
long.
we're back to doing business the way that business should be done. We're presenting a
Right.
product in the very best light to the marketplace, and the sellers need to prepare it, as if they want to give it as a gift. You're
Right.
giving it
And ultimately, this is how it should be. Most sellers are
right,
going somewhere anyway, so it's going to be better for them when they buy. But I
right.
also think that this is what encourages buyers to participate. The reason so many buyers dropped was because they got discouraged. It was so competitive to buy a home, and cash
Hmm.
offers were everywhere that it was impossible. Some people were talking about making 20 different offers and losing in every single one, right?
Yeah.
Why would you keep participating in that marketplace? So
Yep.
yeah, we're back to negotiation, and I'm sure sellers don't love that it's a little harder for them, but that is the signs of a healthy real estate market. We're back to a playing field where it's an open marketplace to establish market value, right? And that's how
Oh,
it
and
should be.
guess what else is back? Home inspections
Yeah, and appraisals,
and
and yeah,
appraisals, and you can't just go, "Here's your bag of money," and leave
yeah,
all your trash, and we'll buy your house. It's over.
yeah,
So
yeah,
the quicker we move on from that and do some staging, the better. I had one this week where I walked in the front door. It was my listing, and we were getting it ready for pictures. And the smell of dog is beyond anything I could describe.
yeah,
And I said to them, "Oh my gosh, that just smacked me in the face." They're like, "Oh well, he's got a little skin problem." I said, "You have got to get the dog out." And I love dogs. I have two,
yeah,
but you cannot have that smell in the house because that is all I could think of the whole time I was there.
yeah,
So, sellers they really had a rude awakening. They did it. They took care of it, and now she's thrilled. But
right.
I think that we have to get back to that sense of pride of ownership, and you're trying to present a product.
Right, right. Yeah, that's what it is. Remember, we used to talk about the probability of selling, right? So you're competing with all these other people who want to sell their house. You have to make yours look the best and stand out
Hmm.
the most to
Hmm.
somebody enough that they buy it over every other one on the market, right? That is the functioning of how this should and will continue to go. So I think anybody coming into the mindset of I'm just going to list it and somebody's going to want it because there's nothing out there, it's just not like that. I mean, yes, inventory is low, but it's not like that, and we're not seeing desperation like that.
No, and I think the other end of that, what we're going to see is there have been a lot of opportunities for people to get their real estate license during these last couple of years.
Hmm.
And I'm always stunned that sellers with a very large asset will use a brand new agent to market their property. But, you
Yeah.
know, in the past couple of years, there's been some luck on their side. Well, now your skills come into play. And now you have
Right.
to know how to price and stage and present and market and social media. And I think we're going to see an attrition of realtors and lenders
Yeah.
moving forward, which is not a bad thing. And
Yeah.
then those of us that have been around for a while and understand how to do this in a tough market will get it done.
I think when I started in real estate, there were something around 40 or 45,000 licensed real estate agents in Cook County, which is an unbelievable number to think about. It's only gone up by several thousand every year, and the last couple of years were like a rocket fuel injection into the number of agents operating.
Hmm.
So, that can't last, and there isn't, frankly, a need for that many people to be delivering this service. There aren't that many that are doing it that well. There aren't that many that should be practicing like that or will maintain that practice. So I agree. The business will get a little bit less cluttered or a little bit easier to conduct the right way, I think, once we lose some people who aren't focused on the right activities.
I agree. And, we end up doing both sides of the transaction because when you get an agent that has no idea what to do, you
Right.
have to make sure things happen for everyone involved. And
Well,
so
and this
it's,
stuff matters. If you miss a
oh,
little
yeah,
line item on a contract, it seems like, oh, we'll just fix it in attorney review. But, I had an agent make an offer on my property the other day, and she missed, there's a line on our contract that says the maximum interest rate your buyer is willing to commit to
yep,
before they allow themselves to walk away. And she didn't fill it out, meaning no matter what, if tomorrow that interest rate goes to 10%, contractually, that buyer is obligated to continue. And I'm
yep,
like, that's an error on her part. She absolutely should have filled it out. There's no reason it shouldn't be there. But if you're offering it to me, that's an advantage. And so, like,
sure.
thankfully, we do good business. I called her and asked her, and we filled it out. But I think you have to be on top of it so that I'm not, trying to correct your errors, right? And I think that's where bad business happens, is when you miss little things, and then little things become big issues when you're under contract, and then you get deals that fall apart or people that end up legally liable. And both situations are nasty.
Yeah, I agree. And luckily, you're a nice guy. You were raised right.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. You raised someone right. I mentioned I was doing an interview the other day, and I talked about Poppy. I mentioned kill him with kindness because we
Hmm.
were talking
I
about
say
that.
that
But I
every
think
day.
now, particularly now, there's just so much fear, and people are on edge. Every conversation I have, I can feel how emotionally on edge everybody is, walking on eggshells, particularly with their finances. So
Hmm.
I've just tried to remember that in every interaction. Kill him with kindness. Things will be
Yep,
okay.
that's definitely a poppyism. And, that's a good point, too, that we can talk about a little bit is people are stressed.
Yeah,
And part of our job really is to help what could be a very stressful situation be less so.
right.
And, there's a lot of hand holding and being understanding and listening and really determining what that particular client needs beyond what they want. And that's not so easy. But that's, I think, what I enjoy the most is helping people achieve their goals and really guiding them to get there.
I agree. That's the coaching aspect of this, or the team
Mhm.
aspect of this. That's the most fun part. I think, particularly with new buyers or people who are unfamiliar with the process, just because for me, I recognize how much they really need the service we
Mhm.
provide. I mean, you're out here trying to figure out a very complex system that has legally, pretty left or
Implications.
lofty ties to it. So
Hmm.
you want to go through that with somebody you trust, and you want to go through it with a team that'll make sure it's done right. So yeah, it's a lot of fun, and I think it's more fun now that it's operating the way it should be. Now that we can make
Agreed.
advice that actually lasts, and they don't have to write an offer while they're walking out the front door.
Yeah, you don't have to just be fast.
Right, right, yeah,
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this shift in the right direction, a level market, an equal market. You're never
right.
totally equal. It's always a little one way or the other, but we were really skewed. So I'll be happy that that's going away a little bit.
I agree. Well, what else? Anything we want to leave everyone else before we log off?
All I can say is I wouldn't be afraid of the real estate market. Doom and gloom, as we said, sells. So if you really want to know what's going on, contact a realtor that you trust, whether it's Matt or I or whomever, and just make sure that you get true answers to your questions, work with solid lenders, and really look at the entire picture and how it relates to you specifically. And if this is something you want to do, we can make it happen.
I agree. And I think you specifically, you need to know your situation, your local area, and talk with experts you trust. Because when you
Yep.
see something about, real estate market or prices crashing for the United States, that may or may not be true for your neighborhood. And that may or may
Exactly.
not be true for your home type or what you're looking for. So
Yep.
you really need to dig into the data and understand what you're hearing versus what's true in your local area. And generally speaking, the best way to get access to that is to talk to local professionals, right?
Yep.
And get the info early and often. It's free, so you might as
Yep.
well take advantage of it. So,
Don't be afraid of it.
um, yeah, don't be afraid of it ever. Well, that's great. Always love talking to you, Mom. Of course.
You too,
We're going to
honey.
do more of these because we haven't checked in a while. So thank you for making time, and I'll talk to you next time.
Sounds good. See you later.